Despite widespread evidence of voter disenfranchisement across Arizona at their recent primary election, and people even on the side defending the way that the primary was run, admitting that there were a number of extremely suspicious things happening during the voting, or I should say during the attempts that people made to try to vote in extremely hard circumstances. Despite all of that, the Maricopa County Board of Supervisors today certified the results of the primary election. And so those results have been accepted. There will almost certainly be protests going forward, as there have been protests since the election. But we want to give you some of the details and run down some of what happened and made it so difficult for people to vote or to have their vote actually be counted in the primary election. So first of all, you need to know that Arizona operates a closed primary system requiring pre-party registration from voters ahead of the election. Many voters had queued for hours on the day of the vote, only to be told that they couldn't vote in the presidential primary as they did not appear on the list of registered voters. And so 5 hours, 6 hours for many people who need to be at their job. It's in Arizona and they're trying to vote, and then they find out that, that they're not on the right party. Even if they have recently registered with the correct party to fit into this closed primary, many found that their registration address had been changed back to some prior address. No explanation for exactly how that happened yet, but that's suspicious. Also, we're talking about just the sheer number of places to vote being significantly cut down since 2008, particularly in Maricopa County. So in that county, there are 1.2 million eligible voters. Back in 2008, there were 403 polling locations. That was cut down to just 60 this year. A significant portion of the hearings that went on were trying to figure out what is the justification for cutting by about 70% the number of polling locations. And so Helen Purcell, the Maricopa County recorder, who you're familiar with, Jimmy, gave several reasons for lowering the number. She said that one of the things is the increase from 2008 to 2016 in the number of people who are eligible on our permanent early voting list. We thought with electronic poll books we could process voters quicker. There's also the factor of the money, and that has to enter into any decision we make about anything. Although the continued conversation after that point made clear that they had been allocated the same amount of money per voter as they had in previous elections. And so there's no lack of funding. I suppose there's been a bit of inflation, but not that significant that you need to cut it by something like 70%. And so we've got some other stats we're going to go over in just a second. But what was your response to watching the hearing? I watched parts. Thankfully, people sent a number of different clips. Do you believe that they provided a good accounting of what happened on Election Day? Do you feel confident going forward?
The people that provided a good accounting at that hearing were the citizens,
poll workers,
poll workers, things like that. People showed up. There was, senior citizens that testified, said that, the one woman they had. By the way, they're passing in Arizona lots of voter suppression laws. So, under the idea that there's voter fraud happening, that someone is voting illegally, which doesn't happen. They passed a law that said if you deliver a ballot, because a lot of, like they just said, a lot of people pre-vote. You get your ballot in the mail, people pre-vote. You can't deliver someone else's vote for them, right? Or it's a felony. So there's this woman who was testifying, and she said, I had to wait in line 5 hours. And first of all, I had to drive around for 45 minutes just to find a place to park. Nobody could. So you
a lot of the polling workers were saying they've never seen fewer parking spots available at these locations.
And she talked about how she had to wait for hours and hours. There was no place to park, no handicap spots. Once she got in, it was the smallest room she's ever voted in before. So, and by the way, her husband couldn't vote because he wasn't healthy enough to stand in a line like that. So he gets disenfranchised. He doesn't get to vote. She has to wait in line hours and hours just to get in to vote. It was classic people who were corrupt were being exposed for being corrupt, but it was classic in the sense that nothing's going to happen to them. They have the power. The people in power wanted this to happen. They wanted to. So but think about that. They've made it a felony for you to help someone vote. But when systematically people in charge of power, people with power and in charge of the election on purpose make it so people can't vote, nothing happens to them. Completely nothing happens to them. Dropping it from 400 to 60. And by the way, they did Maricopa County, the largest land mass county in America, and they had it down to 60 voting places.
Which are not evenly distributed, of course.
By the way, guess where there weren't any? In poor neighborhoods.
Really, not country clubs?
You're kidding. Poor neighborhoods had the least amount of voting. I didn't know that.
That's the beginning of a bad trend in America. That's never happened before. I don't know what this means for the future.
So this is where the Voting Rights Act really shows up. So normally, if you were going to do a change like this, the Justice Department would have to okay it. But there's no Voting Rights Act, so they can just do shit. We're going to cut it from 400 to 60.
Yeah.
Well, if there was the Justice Department goes, no, you can't do that. You're disenfranchising poor people. Or first you have to submit a plan, and then we'll okay your plan if we determine that it doesn't disenfranchise voters.
Not you get to do it, affect an election or two, and then maybe we fix some of it later.
And then maybe we'll fix it. And so there were even people standing up at that hearing saying that, who you wanted to just... they were extremely frustrating. They would say stuff like that. We have to make sure this doesn't happen going forward. No, it already happened. Yeah. They already overthrew your government, okay? It already happened. We have to make sure that doesn't happen going forward. That drive. So there were a lot of frustration, a lot of frustrated people. My favorite part of the hearing was when one activist who, by the way, they were starting to screw around with the way people were being allowed to talk at the meeting, right? People had signed up a day or two earlier. They were being passed over for other people. They start screaming at the hearing. So finally they let this one woman talk, and she said, I'm an activist. That's why. And then she gave a speech. She turned right to Helen Purcell, and she said, you're so corrupt, and you got so used to being corrupt that you got lazy and you got caught. Yeah. And she said, and now you know why they didn't want to have me talk, and she sat down. Yeah. But nothing's going to happen to them, and that's the bigger point. People have been tweeting at me, "Hey, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you talk about this?" First of all, because there's nothing's going to happen.
Yeah, and we've seen it at most of the primaries that have happened already. Yes. We've seen smaller versions of what happened in Arizona.
What I witnessed happening in Las Vegas firsthand was crazy, and no one cared. Nothing happened.
You're a conspiracy theorist for bringing it up.
So chaos favors the establishment. Yeah, exactly. So just always remember that. In elections, chaos favors the establishment. Yeah, because it's not the people who vote to elect people. It's the people who count the votes that elect the people.
And you brought up the Voting Rights Act. And I think that if it were still around, it would certainly help, at least retroactively here. But we need something more fundamental, because that protects... from states specifically trying to screw over racial minorities in terms of their voting, which is a huge problem currently and historically in America. But they've moved far beyond that. They want to stop as many people as possible from voting. In many cases, they don't even fucking care if they're stopping people from their own party. Republicans regularly screw over college students. They don't care if college Republicans don't get to vote as a result of that. They want the fewest people possible, especially in many cases older people, especially poorer people. We need a new Voting Rights Act that stops all of this shit from happening, that creates a system of strict scrutiny for any of these changes, that makes clear to the American people that voting fraud does not exist, has not existed for decades and decades and decades, has never changed the result of an election, but trying to fix voting fraud has and continues to. I want to give you some more details about what happened. So there wasn't just the problem of people showing up and not being able to vote. That's a big issue too. Thousands of other voters were given provisional ballots for the primary, which were not counted as their party registration showed up in the system as independent or no party declared, which is a really convenient way in a closed primary to just say to tens of thousands of people, no, we're not counting your vote.
We're not counting your vote.
We could theoretically. We're just not going to.
And by the way,
they don't.
And you had to stand in line sometimes, again, 5-6 hours. And when you got up there, you didn't know until you got up there that they go, oh, no, here's your provisional ballot. So you just all day, you stood in line, and now you get up there, they go, oh, your vote's not going to count. Yeah, Helen Purcell, by the way, when she testified, did you see any of that videotape?
I didn't see the Helen Purcell specifically, no. I've read some of the quotes
She had
from her
someone
testimony.
standing next to her talking, like Helen wouldn't talk. She would have this woman talk. And then somebody finally asked her, who are you? She admitted she was a lobbyist.
Yeah. I'm not surprised.
He was like, what the F? Are you shitting me?
So why don't we go to a little bit of the video I believe that we have of the Secretary of State of Arizona admitting to a number of these different irregularities that happen in the primary voting, which you're going to see in this video.
Is there a breakdown in that communication? Are people being disenfranchised because their registration status was changed? I've heard anecdotal evidence from both parties, and So we just have to get absolute clarity on that and what we have to do proactively going forward to make sure that never happens again.
Yes, we have been working on that extensively. In fact, this was something that I know happens, and I know it happened to people in this room. It's not hearsay. It happened to someone in my own office. One of my employees was registered as a particular party, went to go vote. I don't want to divulge his personal details, and it happened to him. So we know it happened. And we'll get to that in a second. What's most important right now to our office and to the county recorders is making sure that the people that cast provisional ballots or had to cast provisional ballots, that those are among the first ones that are being cross-checked. Because if those were votes that should count, they need to be counted.
I saw no indication from the final news accounts, specifically from Maricopa County, that says that they were in the end counted.
No. In fact, Helen Purcell said when she was originally interviewed by that Fox News report, local Fox News reporter, Helen Purcell said, of course, we gave them provisional ballot. First, she was asked, how did this happen? And who do you blame for this? And she said, the voters for showing up. That's literally a direct quote.
It is inconvenient for them.
And then
when they show up.
She said, but of course they were given provisional ballots, which aren't going to count, but we have to do the paperwork on them anyway.
Yeah.
So she was, again, perplexed that, you know how inconvenienced the vote counters are when people show up to vote? Look how inconvenienced we are. We have to do the paperwork on those ballots that aren't even going to, she said that.
Yeah.
That they're not, so there's the person in charge saying those votes aren't going to count, then now they're saying they are going to count them, right?
Saying that they are going to, but again, not providing any evidence that it will actually happen.
There's so much corruption in this election that was so readily. Every time a person got up to speak at that hearing, it was another new way they managed to F over people, to manage to suppress them from voting. And you have people like her standing there. She's pretending like she's semi-outraged. She's not outraged by it at all. In fact, she's part of the people who want to suppress the vote on people.
And what's going to happen?
Nothing is nothing.
Like, is she going to...
There's no criminal charges being filed.
Ruined?
Where is the Justice Department? We have Barack Obama in charge and Loretta Lynn. Nothing. There's nothing happened. Why people... there's nothing more important than the vote. Mm-hmm. If there's one thing that I think we can all agree on, there's nothing more important to democracy than the integrity of the vote.